Yeah, I just have a few slides. They're kind of random. I didn't have any targeted trips this year, but I did do a lot of field work with work, mostly coastal environments. So I'm going to present on that. Hopefully, tell some interesting stories. My pictures aren't great. I take phone photos, so maybe that'll change in the future. But one of the things we found is a whole bunch of sites with sweetgrass, and so you can see that sort of lighter green plant in the middle there. That's all sweetgrass, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Um, yeah. So I did some propagation with bayberry. That was kind of fun. I have bayberry in my front yard, so I wanted to see if I could grow it from seed. These are microscope photos, so they're not quite clear, but they're good for educational purposes. So this gray thing, that's the intact bayberry. So it's obviously magnified quite a bit. And then I put it in a food processor. I put a bunch of the berries in the food processor because I wanted to get that wax off and nick the seed coats a little bit, or at least get most of the fruit off and just have the seeds. And so what you can see if you put it through the food processor, I think I used the plastic blade, so not the sharpest blade, but it whirl it for maybe 30 seconds and you get all this wax. And then I wanted to see what it was doing to the berries. I wanted to make sure it wasn't just pureeing them because that's no good, right? So I wanted intact berries, and it looked like it worked. Um, so you can see some berries have this green coat on them. And so that's still the fruit, but the wax is gone. And others, you can see actually a little bit of that green coloring, green coating, and then the actual naked seed. So this is a seed with its seed coat intact. And then what I did is I sowed a bunch of these out into just this flat tray with soil in it outside, left it outside. I did this in November, so November 2014, and left them to overwinter, so they cold stratified. And in the spring, I basically expected nothing to happen because I'm not a great gardener. But what happened, I got tons of seedlings. So this method really worked. I was very pleased. And I was able to grow about 50 of these little shrubs, and I gave them away to a bunch of people who were hopefully planting those. So that was fun. I don't do a lot of propagation, so it's nice to share a success story. I did do quite a bit of field work. And like I said, I'm often in tidal wetlands, so these are coastal environments, and we did find a lot of sweetgrass. It is apparently in decline, and so finding it in so many sites was really was great. It's quite patchy, so even within a site, it doesn't occur all over the place. It occupies a very specific niche, and in coastal wetlands, it's associated with sort of brackish conditions, so it's not right down where it gets flooded by the tide very often, if ever. But it is a wetland species, and so in these marshes, it is associated with some of our other native plants, specifically the salt marsh sedge and red fescue. So these are brackish species as well. And the sweetgrass, we found it so consistently with these associated plants, and we also noted that it mainly grows where these associates are low density. It's not a great competitor, and so that's one of the issues. The other thing where we found it was often on foreshore salt marshes, and what that means is a salt marsh that has formed in front of a dike or other tidal barrier. And what this means is that if the sea level rises, typically what happens in a natural salt marsh is all of those plant communities, they will migrate inland, following the tidal frame, following the rise in sea level. And if there are barriers, they can't do that. And so this is we've identified one of the key threats to the species in the province. But we found them in a whole bunch of places. I'm sorry, this picture's not very good. I take these pictures because they're geolocated. So all I really need is the location. I'm just taking a picture because I need that location, and yeah, you can see. So we found some other interesting things. I've never seen this plant before. It took me a while to figure out what it was. It has these pinnately compound leaves. Definitely looked like, based on the flower, something in the rose family. And it took a while to key it out. We found this on a salt marsh as well, but more like an upland area, sort of on one of the old dikes. And this is down on the Chignecto Isthmus, on the Nova Scotia side of the Mississauga River. It's one of our salt marsh restoration sites. And this is a hybrid between the red chokeberry and the showy mountain ash. It's been documented in the flora, so it wasn't I didn't, it wasn't that hard to figure out. But it did take some sleuthing, and apparently it is quite common in this kind of environment, especially when you've got the two parent species nearby. So this site definitely has red chokeberry. I have not found the mountain ash on the site, but it's probably nearby in the forest. So that was kind of fun. You don't see that every day. It is a native hybrid. I don't believe it's considered rare, but it was kind of fun to find that. What else did we get? We found some other interesting things on the coast, and this is not a rare species by all means, but we found a very strange thing. This was on the beach at Caribou Monroe's Island Provincial Park. We were doing shoreline surveys, and typically in a beach environment, this intertidal environment, you don't find plants. You might find some algae, some seaweeds, but we did find these alive salt marsh bulrush. We were able to tell it was salt marsh bulrush based on these tubers. Um, Bulbochinus maritimus is the Latin now. And we were trying to figure this out because typically you don't see a lot of salt marsh on the ocean side of a site like this, which has a beach. It's pretty high energy. There's a lot of wind. There's lots of erosion happening. And my colleague Danica Van Proosty, a professor at St. Mary's in geography, she told us what had happened. Salt marsh bulrush is a plant that typically lives in a more sheltered environment, is a salt marsh species. It likes its feet wet, but it's not in a high energy situation. So what happened at this site is over decades, the dune used to be on the other side. So it used to be on the left side of this photo. And the dune has migrated, that's what dunes do, inland, landward, I should say. And it basically, the sand moved over top of the backshore salt marsh, but the plants still survived. It's not doing very well. It's struggling, and it's probably getting eroded away and will eventually drown with sea level rise. But that was a really neat thing that we saw. You don't see that every day. And it was, again, it took some sleuthing to figure out what was going on because this is not where you would typically see this plant, but it does indicate a story on a larger time frame that we're seeing on our coastline. Here's one that we're finding increasingly. This is not a native plant. It's not a particularly attractive plant. It's a relative of quackgrass, which is Elymus repens. This one's called tall wheatgrass. It looks like an Elymus, except it's a bunch grass, so it occurs in these discrete clusters, and you can really pick it out from a distance in these environments. What's alarming about this plant is that, unlike most of our invasives, this one can actually colonize a salt marsh. So it's salt tolerant, and it is establishing in areas where typically you only see native species. And this is the high marsh, the high salt marsh characterized by salt hay, or what used to be called Spartina patens, which is now called Sporobolus pumilus. So this is something we want people to look out for if you're in a tidal environment. It's definitely spreading in Nova Scotia. We're finding lots more records. Please report it on iNaturalist and tag the invasive species in Nova Scotia project. This is something you can see even in the winter because these tufts, even though it's herbaceous, they will persist. You can see them in the winter as well. This is just a fun thing. This is more of an educational piece, but one of our sites we found both species of cattail, so the narrowleaf and the broadleaf cattail. And I just took this picture for my colleagues to show them the difference of broadleaf. The male flower on the top and the female flowers on the bottom, those clusters have no separation. There's no dividing. There's no stem. You can't see the stem between them. Whereas in the narrowleaf cattail, you can see a few centimeters of naked stem. You could also see the leaves are broader on the broadleaf versus the narrowleaf. And the inflorescence itself is much broader as well. This is not news to anyone who spends time in wetlands, but it was just kind of cool to see them both on the same site at the same time. Now, again, if anyone spent time in southwestern Nova Scotia, this rare species is not new to you, but I'd never seen it before. I made a special trip to go see this. I have been doing field work down there, and so it was nice to see Baccharis. It's a somewhat salt tolerant shrub, and I've been working on ecosystem classification data from DNR, and we've been able to establish that it actually does live a little bit higher up in the tidal frame, a little higher elevation than typical salt marsh species like high marsh and low marsh plants. And so that's been fun. Speaking of shrubs that live in salty environments, you've met my student Allison McNeil, who's studying Iva frutescens, the marsh elder, and we just took some of these photos in the spring. It's truly a shrub, and it does live on high marsh, so it does have the ability to tolerate salt and tolerates quite a bit of ice damage as well. It's a really cool plant. We're really interested in it. Although it's a shrub, what we find in the field is that when it resprouts in the spring, when the new growth, the new buds open, um, it only goes about 3/4 of the way up the plant. So the stems from last year that are at the tallest part of the plant, they're just dead. They don't have any living buds. So it regenerates mostly from the bottom half of the plant, which is interesting. No idea why. And I don't see this in a lot of other shrubs. So it's kind of interesting. And we're working on this species. And it's somewhat more common than something like Baccharis, for example. And it's a salt marsh plant. A couple random yellow flowered species that I saw. These are not rare or anything like that, but I kind of like them. I've never seen this one before, Canada cinquefoil. It's a little more uncommon than its close relative, which is the field cinquefoil, which is Potentilla simplex. This one can be distinguished in that the first node of the stem coming out of the ground will have a flower coming off of it, whereas Potentilla simplex, it it's only the second and above nodes that have the flower. So it's very distinctive, not super rare. I'd never seen it before. Another plant I rarely see, and we saw this during the Western Head field trip, is the perennial evening primrose. Also not rare. I just never see it, and it's kind of nice to see something like that. That's interesting for me in any case. I'm doing quite a bit of work on ecosystem classification, and so looking at this data all winter long, you start to pick out indicator species, and I just don't see these things that often. So this is a classic floodplain forest indicator, jack in the pulpit that we can see here. Often found another pretty good indicator of floodplain forest conditions is this moss, and I just had to put this up here because it has the best common name, the electrified cat's tail moss, Ratidiadelphus triquetris, which is hard to say, but it's very common in floodplains as well. It's just nice to see. Nothing exotic, but fun for me. Now, this is something I'd never seen before. It's not super common, and I was using one of the apps. Some friends had recommended I try the Seek app. It didn't work. It failed miserably with this. It was telling me it was some kind of maple. It was telling me things I knew it wasn't. iNaturalist to the rescue. I posted this on iNaturalist, and I think the algorithm got it, or someone ID'd it very quickly. I'd never seen it before. It's the meadow cow parsnip. So this is Heracleum spondylium, not the regular cow parsnip, which is Heracleum, one of the other ones, Mantagasium, I think. And then, of course, giant hogweed is the other Heracleum we have in the province, which is even less common. So that was fun. I don't know how many of you have seen this, but I certainly didn't know what it was when I first looked at it. Now, here's one that's quite common in southwestern Nova Scotia as well. You can tell I did some trips down there. It was nice. I don't get down there very often. And I just thought it was fun that the skunk cabbage, normally it's in a swamp environment, normally it's shaded, there's tree canopy, but it is a wetland plant. And here I found it in these coastal barrens growing out in the open near the Cape Horseshoe Lighthouse. Not sure what's going on there, but it's obviously a very adaptable, very flexible plant, and it was neat to see it in these different environments. And speaking of which, a white pine growing where it probably isn't going to be very successful on a coastal barren quite close to the coast like Polly's Cove, and just showing that classic winter damage, probably caused by salt spray or desiccation by winds. You don't see this in the spruce trees that grow all over this in the same environment, same distance from the coast. So it's one of those things that keeps the barrens open, especially from pines. Pines do well on inland barrens, but they really don't do well on coastal barrens. And I'm coming to the end. We had a really good year despite all the drought and everything like that. In fact, possibly caused in part by the drought. Fall color, especially the shrubs, were fantastic this year on the Atlantic coast. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you.